On Mother's Day, my son, a young, wealthy, and busy businessman, came to visit me, holding a bouquet as bright as the morning sunday. He placed it on the table, looked at me with a gentle but distant expression, and said, "Mom, my wife still sends you $5,000 every month, right? I just want to make sure you're comfortable." I froze. My heart started pounding. $5,000? For the past 8 months, I'd been living on food packages from the church and small donations from kind neighbors. I whispered, my voice trembling, "Son, the church is helping me get by." He stared at me, the smile vanishing from his lips. And then my daughter-in-law appeared, radiant in a silk dress, shiny high heels, and a cloud of expensive perfume that drifted through the room like mockery. Her smile was dazzling, but her eyes were colder than any winter I've ever known. She didn't realize that on that very day, the last light of her elegance would fade forever. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Margaret Hayes, a 67-year-old widow living alone in a small house on the outskirts of Dallas, Texas. This house used to be filled with laughter, the place where my husband and I raised our only son, David. After my husband passed away from a heart attack 10 years ago, I learned to slow down, tending my garden, cooking, occasionally teaching Bible classes at St. Mary's Church down the street. I didn't have much, but it was enough, until old age came knocking and everything grew more expensive with each passing day. David, the boy I once carried in my arms, is now a millionaire at 38. He owns a chain of tech companies, drives a brand new Tesla, and lives in a mansion in Park Cities, where the annual property tax alone equals what I've earned in my entire life. I was proud of him, of course. I raised him with these hands, believing he would grow into a good, kind, and grateful man. So when he walked into my house that afternoon, sunlight spilling across his tired but handsome face, my heart warmed until he spoke. "Mom, my wife still sends you $5,000 every month, right? I just want to make sure you're comfortable." It felt like someone had sucked the air out of the room. My heart pounded against my ribs, and my fingers clenched the corner of my old apron. I tried to smile, but my lips were dry as dust. "5,000?" I repeated, my voice catching. "Son, the church is helping me survive." David's eyes widened, his smile dissolving. He glanced toward the woman who had just entered, Clara, his wife, in a pearl-collared silk dress and shimmering silver heels. The scent of Chanel No. 5 filled my small living room, overpowering the smell of the apple pie I had just baked to welcome my son. Clara smiled lightly, a smile that could melt a room if it weren't so cold. "Oh, Mother, you must have forgotten," she said sweetly, her voice like honey over ice. "I stop by every month to bring the money, remember?" I looked at her calmly. "If you did bring it, then it must have gotten lost somewhere," I said, barely above a whisper. The room fell silent. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the hum of cars outside, and the pounding of my own heart. David looked between us, between the gray-haired mother in her apron and the glamorous wife in her designer dress, his brow furrowed. "Clara, you have been bringing the money, right? I transfer it to you every month." Clara tilted her head, her smile unwavering. "Of course, David, I come here every month. Maybe Mother just forgot. You know, old age. The memory isn't what it used to be." The words were soft as feathers, but they landed on my heart like stone. Old age. I'd heard that phrase too many times since my husband died, from people who thought an old widow was nothing but a fading memory. But I knew my memory. I remembered every bill, every prayer, every face at church, and I knew without a shadow of doubt that Clara had never given me a single penny. I nodded slightly, choosing silence. Some battles aren't meant to be fought right away. They're meant to be observed. David stood, walked over, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mom, it's probably just a misunderstanding. I'll check the accounts. I just want you to live comfortably, without worry." I smiled faintly, but something inside me had awakened, a quiet storm of suspicion and resolve. I said nothing more, just cleared the table and placed a glass of orange juice in front of him. As David sat down, Clara moved gracefully to his side, resting a possessive hand on his shoulder. Her gaze swept over me, cool, dismissive, the look of someone who believes money can buy integrity. The air in the room turned cold. Even though the sun outside was blazing, a chill ran down my spine. Clara glanced around the room, her eyes brushing over the old photo frames on the wall. David, a little boy, golden hair, bright eyes, a carefree smile. She exhaled softly. "Oh, Mother, you've done such a great job keeping the house clean, even at your age." I smiled faintly. "Old, yes, but not so old that I forget who comes through my door, Clara." David looked at me, uneasy. "Mom, come on, and it's Mother's Day. Don't get upset. I just want you to be happy, my son," I said, my eyes still on Clara. "So do I, but happiness doesn't come from what people say they've done for you. It comes from what they've actually done." David froze, and Clara's smile tightened before disappearing altogether. After they left, I sat alone in the living room. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, spreading across the old wooden table. $5,000 a month. 8 months. $40,000. That money could have fixed the leaking roof, replaced my broken fridge, helped me live out my final years in comfort. Instead, I'd been counting canned soup from the church pantry and thanking God for every loaf of donated bread. I pressed a hand to my chest, not from anger, but from the ache that rose inside. A silent, bone-deep ache. That night, I opened my old notebook, the one I used to jot down grocery lists and prayers. But this time, I wrote something different. Find the truth. And beneath it, don't trust fake tears. I closed the notebook and took a deep breath. My hands trembled slightly, but my resolve did not. That afternoon, I walked to the post office down the road where the public phone still worked. I didn't want to call from home, not when I suspected Clara might be watching. I called David's company and spoke politely, my tone steady. "Hello, this is Margaret Hayes, David Hayes' mother. I'd like to speak with someone in accounting. It's a personal matter." After a short hold, a middle-aged woman answered. "This is Sandra Miller, head accountant. Mrs. Hayes, how can I help you?" I gripped the receiver tightly, keeping my voice calm. "Thank you, Sandra. I just need to confirm something small. My son said his company has been deducting $5,000 each month from his personal account to send to me. I'd like to know if that's correct." There was a short pause. Then Sandra spoke, her tone hesitant. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm not able to disclose personal financial details, but let me check. Yes, I recall seeing automated transfers on the same day every month for that exact amount. It does appear that the money was sent, but I'm not sure to whom." "To whom?" I repeated. "It wasn't sent to me." "I'm not certain, Mrs. Hayes. The recipient's name matches yours, but the account number is different. I assumed it was yours." A chill ran down my spine. I forced myself to speak evenly. "Thank you, Sandra. That's all I needed for now." I hung up and stood motionless in the phone booth. My heart raced, but my mind was clear as glass. There it was, the truth. Someone had created a fake account under my name, and only one person was close enough to pull that off. Clara. On the walk home, my shadows stretched long across the road. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and dry earth, a smell that reminded me of poor Texas summers long ago, when my father used to say, "If you want to know who's honest, look at their hands." Honest hands always show the marks of work. I thought of Clara's hands, long manicured fingers, diamond rings holding designer handbags, not a single callus, not a trace of real labor. That night, I skipped dinner. I made a cup of peppermint tea and sat at the kitchen table under the warm yellow light. The house was so quiet I could hear the last cicadas outside fading into the night. I opened a new page and wrote, September 10th. Clara visited, elegant and pretending to care. New car, same lies. Called David's company, confirmed. The money still being transferred, but not to my account. Tomorrow, the truth begins to surface. I put down the pen and closed the notebook. The small lamp reflected my shadow in the window pane. A silver-haired woman, small in stature, but with eyes that still burned bright. I knew that starting tomorrow, I wouldn't just be a waiting mother anymore. I would be a seeker of justice. I turned off the light and stepped out onto the porch. The night breeze carried the scent of jasmine and damp wood. In the corner of the garden, moonlight fell on the old wooden bench where my husband and I used to sit and talk. I touched its worn armrest and whispered, "Frank, if you were still here, you'd tell me to do what's right, wouldn't you?" The only reply was the whisper of wind beneath the eaves, but I understood. It was an answer. I went back inside, locked the door, and stood quietly in front of the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't tired or defeated. She was Margaret Hayes, a mother who would never again let anyone take her dignity. And I knew that when the morning came, Clara's game would start to fall apart piece by piece. The next morning, while I was cutting lavender stems to dry, a sudden, firm knock echoed at the door. Not the soft tap of a mail-carrier or neighbor. This was steady, deliberate. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to open it. Standing on the porch was a tall, middle-aged man with graying hair, dressed neatly in a
I'm Bennett, chief accountant at your son's company, Hayes and Partners. I narrowed my eyes slightly. You're Bennett? I only know Sandra, the accountant I spoke to on the phone. He nodded. Yes, Sandra is my assistant. She told me about your call yesterday, and I thought perhaps you should know a few things. His voice was calm but serious, tinged with regret. I invited him inside and poured a glass of water. Morning light streamed through the window, catching the lines on his face, the look of a man who'd seen more than he wished to. He set his leather briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside was a thick folder, neatly clipped and organized. I saw sharp printed text, rows of numbers, the familiar language of accounting, my world for 30 years before retirement. He slid the folder toward me and spoke slowly. These are copies of 8 transfers, each for $5,000, $40,000 total. Recipient, an account under the name Clara Hayes. It felt like a bucket of ice water had been poured over me. My hands shook as I flipped through each page. The papers were clear. Sender, David Hayes. Recipient, Clara Hayes. Verified by the bank, same date every month, steady as clockwork for 8 months. I looked up, my voice hoarse. Mr. Bennett, who opened that account? He sighed, removed his glasses, and wiped them with a cloth. Your daughter-in-law, Mrs. Hayes. Every document for the sub-account bears her signature and a signed authorization from David. I froze. Authorization? You mean David gave her permission to use my name? He nodded. Most likely he didn't read the forms carefully. She presented an ID copy of you, which I suspect was forged, very sophisticated. The system automatically registered it as your account, even though the recipient was her. I pressed a hand to my forehead, the room spinning slightly. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. For 8 months, Clara had used my name, a mother's name, to siphon money from my own son? I asked quietly. And David? He doesn't know. Bennett hesitated before answering. Honestly, I don't think so. David's a hard-working man, but he trusts people too easily. He lets Clara handle most of the paperwork, and he paused and looked up at me. She's also been using the company credit card for personal expenses. I stared at him. The company card? Yes, the corporate credit card of Hayes and Partners. Supposed to be for client entertainment and business expenses, but recently we found irregular charges, spa visits, jewelry, clothing, even first-class flights to New York, over $30,000 in just 3 months. I sat in silence. The words spa, jewelry, flights echoed in my head like a hammer striking metal. I turned to look out the window. The morning sun glowed over the wooden bench where Clara and I once sat drinking tea while she chatted about her work. I remembered her voice that day. Mother, David's so busy, I handle everything for him. Now I knew everything meant every dollar. I turned back to Bennett, my voice raspy but firm. Mr. Bennett, if I want to expose this, will you help me? He met my gaze, his gray-blue eyes steady. Mrs. Hayes, I believe in justice, but I also believe in evidence. We need to prepare carefully, otherwise she'll twist the narrative and turn David against you. Clara's not an easy opponent. I nodded. I know. I've seen her do it before, smiling while she lies. Bennett gave a faint, grim smile. I'll help, but give me time to gather everything.
I need to pull all transaction histories, related documents, and secure written confirmation from the bank that the account isn't yours. It'll take a few days, but I promise we'll have the truth." I looked at him, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen in anyone for a long time: integrity. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," I said softly. "You have no idea how much this means to me." He closed the folder and stood. "I'm just doing what's right, Mrs. Hayes, and I'm sorry to say this, but cases like yours happen more often than you'd think. Many people are betrayed by those closest to them." I nodded, my eyes landing on a framed family photo on the wall. David, at 10 years old, grinning beside his father. I remembered that day clearly. It had rained lightly, and my husband had said, "Teach him to tell the difference between good men and smooth talkers, Maggie. They often wear the same smile." Bennett left afterward, leaving me alone with the stack of papers on the table. The door clicked shut, and the house went quiet again. I stared at the thick file, every transfer line spelled out, each one a piece of evidence of betrayal. I carefully placed everything into a small metal box and slid it under the cabinet. When I turned the key, it felt like I was locking another door, the last door of my trust. As afternoon faded, sunlight spilled across the porch and lit up my gray hair. I brewed a cup of black tea, sat at the kitchen table, and looked out the garden where the lavender swayed gently in the wind. Everything looked peaceful, but inside me a quiet fire burned. I took out my notebook, opened to a fresh page, and wrote slowly but firmly. September 11th, Mr. Bennett came, brought records of 8 transfers, $5,000 each month to an account under the name Clara Hayes. Clara is also using the company card for personal spending. David was deceived, not just my money, but his too. I have an ally. The fight begins. I set the pen down and looked toward the window. Outside, the sky burned red, like a streak of fire slashing across the clouds. In a low, steady voice, I said, "Clara, you forgot I worked as an accountant for 40 years. I can read lies and numbers, and this time, the numbers will speak for me." I closed the notebook, feeling lighter. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. There was someone, a witness, willing to stand with me. That night, I slept better than usual. The crickets in the yard sounded like a steady count of hope. In my dream, I saw Bennett standing in a white light, holding up the file, while Clara backed away, her face shaken as each secret peeled back. And when I woke, I knew I was no longer a victim. I was the one setting the truth in motion. 3 days later, with every fact in my head lined up as neatly as rows on a balance sheet, I decided to act. I called David. My son's voice was warm and familiar, but I heard a hint of exhaustion. "Mom, I'm sorry. I've been swamped lately. Clara says she's been visiting you regularly, right?" I smiled and kept my tone light. "She has, son. Clara's very thoughtful. I'm thinking of inviting you both to dinner this Sunday. It's been a while since we've had a proper meal together." David agreed happily, never noticing the thin wire hidden in that invitation. I spent all Sunday morning preparing, not because I wanted a perfect dinner, but because I wanted it to feel completely ordinary. Honey roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, apple walnut salad, and apple pie, David's childhood favorites. I polished my late husband's old silverware and set the dining table with soft candlelight. Everything was arranged carefully, warm, sincere, and just enough to make a liar let down her guard. When the clock struck 6, I heard a familiar engine at the gate. A gleaming silver Lexus slid into the driveway. Clara stepped out first, flawless as always, soft waves in her hair, a jade silk dress, and a faint trail of Dior. David followed with a bouquet of white lilies. "Mom, you look great," David grinned, placing the flowers on the table. "Son, I'm better than ever, thanks to God's grace, and the two of you." Clara smiled, her lips curled in that usual smug way. I recognized that look, the look of someone convinced she holds every string. I poured wine and tea, chatted about the weather, the lavender, and the new neighbors down the street. Everything flowed as if no shadow of doubt had ever passed through this house. I let the room warm up, let her relax. When the main course was served, I looked up and smiled. "I truly appreciate you both, especially for this month's $5,000.
Clara paused, just a fraction, then flashed a bright smile and sipped her wine. "Oh, Mother, please don't be so formal. I'm just doing what I should." I nodded, pretending to be shy. "I'm thrilled. I just bought a new heater. Texas gets chilly early, and thanks to that money, I feel much more at ease." Clara's smile widened, smug and satisfied. She tilted her head toward David, as if to say, "See, everything's fine." I watched her slowly, then asked in an offhand way, like it was nothing at all, "Oh, Clara, I'm just curious, what day do you usually send it?" She didn't brace herself. She answered instantly, like a reflex. "The 10th every month, Mother." I nodded lightly, but before I could say more, David spoke, a bit puzzled. "Wait, not the 10th, honey. I set the auto transfer for the 15th. The room sunk into cold stillness. I smiled gently and set my fork down. "Oh, wonderful. I'll go to the bank on the 15th to check, just to make sure the system isn't having issues." Clara gave a brittle laugh, trying to hide her unease. "Oh, Mother, you're so careful. Don't worry. I've been sending it regularly." David nodded, but his eyes had shifted. He turned to his wife, about to say something, but she quickly changed the subject to work and the weather. I sat quietly watching them both. Inside me was a clean, perfect calm, the calm of someone who knows she set the exact right trap. After dinner, I brought out dessert, crisp apple pie, cinnamon drifting through the room. David praised it. Clara barely ate, glancing at her watch as if eager to leave. I knew she was struggling to breathe in a room she thought she controlled. At the door, I said softly, "Thank you both for coming. I haven't laughed this much in a long time. Remember, I'll check the account on the 15th, just to be sure the bank system isn't acting up." Clara forced a smile. "Yes, Mother, I'm sure there won't be any."
You used it for cars, spas, vacations, and lied to my face. Clara stepped back, face drained of color. "You don't understand. Enough." David slammed his palm on the table. The glass rattled sharply. The room fell silent. Only Clara's ragged breathing and my pounding heartbeat filled the air. Reverend Cole, who had sat quietly the whole time, folded his hands and spoke in a low, steady tone. "Sometimes God doesn't need to punish the guilty. He just lets them see their true reflection." I sat back down and looked at Clara, my voice calm. "You know, I didn't need that money. What I needed was respect. And you took that not just from me, but from your husband, too." Clara sobbed, stammering, "Mother, I'm sorry. I just wanted to help David manage things better. I didn't mean—" I shook my head. "Stop lying. You didn't manage. You stole." Bennett stepped forward, placing the final file in front of David. "These are the originals, Mr. Hayes. Forged authorizations, bank records, and receipts. Keep them. You'll need them to protect what's yours." David said nothing. He stared at the numbers, then lifted his eyes to me. In them, I saw pain, shame, and the first spark of awakening. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I was such a fool to trust her." I laid a hand on his shoulder. "No, son. The mistake isn't in trust. It's in those who betray it." Clara burst into sobs, glancing wildly around for an escape. "I can't take this anymore," she screamed, then suddenly stood. "I don't need anyone's pity. If you want to believe her, go ahead." She snatched her purse and stormed out. Her heels struck the wooden floor, each step sounding like the end of something. David didn't stop her. He just sat, head bowed. The door slammed shut. Silence fell. No more crying, no more excuses. Only the fading smell of stew and the heavy presence of truth. I looked at the open envelope. Papers scattered, proof of 8 months of deceit. I exhaled softly. "It's done," I said quietly. "The curtain's fallen." Bennett nodded, gathering the files. Reverend Cole rose and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've done what not every mother has the courage to do, Margaret." I smiled faintly, but inside there was an empty ache. This victory didn't bring joy, only release. When everyone left, I stayed behind. I cleared the table, the half-eaten plates, the red wine glasses, the chair where Clara had sat, still faintly warm. I looked around the room, remembering every word, every glance. 8 months of deception, and in one evening it had shattered like glass. I gathered the fallen pages, stacked them neatly, and placed them back in the envelope. My hands trembled, not from fear, but because I had finally reclaimed my dignity. Outside, the wind rose, lifting the curtains. I looked up at the sky. moonlight streaming through the window, shining on the envelope like a seal of truth. I knew every lie eventually comes to light, and tonight it had, right here in my own home. I picked up the envelope, noticing the blue stamp, Texas County Court. My chest tightened. I'd known this would come, but seeing it made my heart heavy. Inside was the official notice. Case number 23CF981. Margaret Hayes, plaintiff versus Clara Hayes, defendant. Elder financial exploitation and family fraud. Amelia had moved faster than I expected. She'd sent a short message. All evidence filed. Prepare for preliminary hearing next Monday. I set the letter on the table. Afternoon light filtered through the blinds, falling across Bennett's thick folder from the week before. I touched its smooth cover, cold to the touch, but holding 8 months of betrayal inside. Justice was close, but strangely I felt no satisfaction. The morning of the hearing, the sky was gray, the wind sharp like something about to break. I arrived early with Amelia. She wore a brown coat, her face stern but full of resolve. "You holding up, Margaret?" she asked, as we walked into the main hall. I pressed my lips together. "I am. I just wish it didn't have to come to this." The courthouse hallway was long, tiled in glossy white, smelling faintly of coffee, paper, and tension. It was unfamiliar, but somehow it made me feel safe. When we entered the courtroom, Clara was already there. She sat at the defendant's table, in a black suit, hair neatly tied back, her face pale, but her eyes pretending calm. Beside her sat a young lawyer, nervous, likely hired last minute. David sat behind them, alone and silent. He didn't look at me or at her. His eyes were sunken, tired and hollow. When I sat down, Clara glanced over and gave a faint smile, a mix of defiance and despair. The judge struck the gavel. The court is now in session for the case of elder financial exploitation, Margaret Hayes versus Clara Hayes. Amelia stood first, opening her file. Her voice was clear and steady. "Your Honor, for 8 consecutive months, the defendant, Mrs. Clara Hayes, used a fraudulent bank account under the name Margaret Hayes to misappropriate a total of $40,000. Additionally, the defendant used the company's secondary credit card belonging to Hayes and Partners for personal expenses, including spa services, travel, and a private vehicle purchase." The courtroom went silent except for the soft rustle of paper as Amelia laid out the evidence. Bank statements, spa receipts, the Lexus invoice, Cancun tickets, each placed neatly before the judge. She paused, then looked directly at Clara. The defendant not only took money from her mother-in-law, a 67-year-old widow, but concealed it by forging legal documents and falsifying bank signatures. This was a deliberate, systematic act of deception. Clara's lawyer quickly stood, trying to object. "Your Honor, my client maintains this was merely a misunderstanding in household financial management. Mrs. Margaret Hayes is elderly and may have misremembered the transfers from her son's account and household expenses." I felt my blood boil. Clara lowered her head, feigning fragility, then looked up, her voice trembling. "Your Honor, my mother-in-law's memory's been forgetful lately. I've brought her money many times, but she doesn't remember. I never meant to hurt anyone. Maybe she just misunderstood." Those words cut through my chest like a knife. I wanted to jump up and scream, but Amelia placed a hand on my shoulder, signaling me to stay calm. Then she stepped forward, her voice sharp as steel. "Your Honor, Mrs. Margaret Hayes' memory is sharp enough to document in detail every single day Clara visited, and everything she said, and here is her journal to prove it." Amelia pulled out my brown leather notebook and held it up. In this, Mrs. Hayes recorded 8 full months of visits, dates, times, and even the defendant's exact words. I left the envelope in the car. Every line and page perfectly matches the bank transaction data. If this is what you call memory loss, then it's the sharpest one I've ever seen. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge peered over his glasses, slowly flipped through a few pages of the file, then frowned and turned towards Bennett, who had been invited as an expert witness. "Mr. Bennett," the judge said, "do you confirm the figures in this report?" Bennett stood, adjusted his tie, and replied firmly, "Your Honor, I am the chief accountant at Hayes and Partners. I confirm that all statements and reconciliations are authentic. Each transfer was made from Mr. David Hayes' personal account to an account opened under the name Margaret Hayes." The judge nodded, his expression stern. I looked towards Clara. She lowered her head, nails digging into her palms, her face pale. Amelia continued, "Your Honor, Under the Texas Elder Protection Act, the defendant's conduct constitutes elder financial exploitation and marital financial fraud. We request that the court order the defendant to return the full amount, including interest and court fees, and prohibit her from managing or accessing any financial accounts belonging to Mr. Feck David Hayes for the next 5 years. No one spoke. The only sound was the steady ticking of the wall clock. The judge lifted his head, his voice firm and final. After reviewing all documents, testimonies, and evidence, the court rules the defendant, Mrs. Clara Hayes, shall repay the full $40,000 to Mrs. Margaret Hayes. The defendant is hereby stripped of access to and management rights over her husband, Mr. David Hayes, financial accounts. The defendant must also complete a mandatory 6-month financial rehabilitation program. This court is adjourned. The gavel struck 3 times, dry and cold like the sound of a steel door closing. Clara sank into her chair. I saw her trying to keep her composure, but tears began spilling down her cheeks. She turned to David, her voice trembling. "You have to believe me. I didn't mean—" David said nothing. He just looked at her with empty eyes, then turned away. The sight made my heart crack open. I didn't feel joy, nor triumph, only a dull ache, because to reclaim justice, I had to watch my son lose his marriage. I had once dreamed that David would be happy someday with someone who loved and cared for him, with a warm home of his own. Now that dream had vanished, buried somewhere between the pages of a court file. Amelia placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Margaret. You didn't just protect yourself, you saved your son." I nodded, but my lips couldn't form a smile. Justice, I realized, is a double-edged sword. It cuts through the chains of deceit, but also severs the fragile threads of family. When everyone left, I stayed behind. I cleared the table, the half-eaten plates, the red wine glasses, the chair where Clara had sat, still faintly warm. I looked around the room, remembering every word, every glance. 8 months of deception, and in one evening it had shattered like glass. I gathered the fallen pages, stacked them neatly, and placed them back in the envelope. My hands trembled, not from fear, but because I had finally reclaimed my dignity. Outside, the wind rose, lifting the curtains. I looked up at the sky, moonlight streaming through the window, shining on the envelope like a seal of truth. I knew every lie eventually comes to light, and tonight it had, right here in my own home. I picked up the envelope, noticing the blue stamp, Texas County Court. My chest tightened. I'd known this would come, but seeing it made my heart heavy. Inside was the official notice, case number 23CF981. Margaret Hayes, plaintiff, versus Clara Hayes, defendant. Elder financial exploitation and family fraud. Amelia had moved faster than I expected. She'd sent a short message. All evidence filed. Prepare for preliminary hearing next Monday. I set the letter on the table. Afternoon light filtered